We're now joined by Jonathan Gullis, Conservative MP. Jonathan, good to see you. Welcome to the brand new Independent Republican Mike Graham. A little bit different from the last time.
This is how your Downing Street would look, Mike.
This is how my Downing Street would look, absolutely right. You've been in the thick of it pretty much most of the day. I know you tweeted out earlier that you were pleased to see Boris Johnson supporting the things that you were supporting. What sort of a day has it been? Tell us how you're feeling. You're looking all right. You look as if you're not too battered and bruised.
Well, look, it's obviously frustrating in part because we've acted in good faith. We met the Prime Minister's red lines, which was about making sure that any amendments we laid were within the scope of international arguments and would not mean Rwanda would walk away from the table. We met those tasks. We obviously pushed our amendments to a vote and sadly, obviously, were defeated. But what we're very pleased by is that nearly everyone, in fact, in one of the amendments, actually more people voted for it than actually signed it. So it shows that there is a real strength in numbers and therefore a strength in feeling. And what we hope is that the Prime Minister and his team will really engage with us over the next 24 hours to find a way to make sure that we can get this bill done, because no one disagrees in the Conservative Party about making Rwanda work. The disagreement here is really about whether or not international law is more supreme than our sovereign parliament and our ability as MPs to control our borders and our national security. And as you know, Mike, you and I think, are on the same argument here. The idea of voting Leave in 2016, the idea of voting Conservative to get Brexit in 2019 was about taking back control of those things. And that's all we're simply trying to do, to make sure that we can get flights off to Rwanda in decent numbers so we have a sustainable deterrent to stop people unnecessarily crossing the channel.
I was talking to Nadine Dorries earlier, and she said it's a bit like those two periods all over again, because the Tory party itself, which is kind of trying to block it. I mean, you know, in 2016, you had Tories who didn't want to leave the European Union. In 2019, or in 2019 before the election, you had Tories sort of trying to finesse it, trying to make sure that, you know, we kept closer ties with the European Union. Now you've got Tories who don't want to make it too strong because they're worried that people will think they're not very nice.
Well, I think the problem here is that some colleagues have got caught up in the idea that if we were to ignore the ECHR, we'd be copying Russia and Belarus.
Yeah, which is rubbish.
Which is rubbish, Mike, because The Spectator covered very recently that in France, Strasbourg, the European Court of Human Rights, said that there was an Uzbekistan native who was a suspected terrorist. And what the French did was ignore that Strasbourg claimed that this individual claimed he would be unsafe to go back to Uzbekistan, put him on a flight and flew him back. You know, actually the UK has the best record for following what the European Court advises. I think actually at our own detriment and therefore our own security as well, which is a real concern. And ultimately, again, what we're trying to do here is to make it clear that we will allow people to put individual claims in about their fitness to fly. We want to make it clear, if we're saying Rwanda's safe, then it's safe for every individual too. So we won't have months, if not years, of people backlogging the system in the courts, which means we can't get the flights off to Rwanda. With the ECHR, we want to make it clear again, the government's accepted itself that it's willing to ignore the European Convention of Human Rights and the Court of Human Rights. So why not make it the default to do that? And then in exceptional circumstances, accept some judgments rather than the other way round, which means you'll have the civil service block you. Some ministers won't want to really do it, let's be perfectly honest, Mike. And of course, set ourselves up for an almighty showdown, probably in another court in this country. Let's avoid these unnecessary court backlogs. Let's avoid these unnecessary ding-dongs. Let's make it clear that Parliament has decided, the highest court in the land, that we're going to ignore these Rule 39 pyjama injunctions that were never part of the Convention in 1950 and that were only first used in 2005 and that no other European signatory seems to think is law, but we far too often treat it as if it is somehow law. And even the European Convention itself says it's not law.
No, it's almost as though, you know, the Parliament that passes the laws is waiting for somebody to put a sort of obstacle in the way. You know, like when people were being put on the Bibby Stockholm and lawyers were going, oh, they're frightened of water. You know, they weren't frightened of water when they got in the dinghy to come across the channel. You know, it's supposed to be a dangerous mission, and I know some people have died trying, but to a large extent, particularly in the summer months, it's a pretty safe route for them to come. And I know that's not a very popular thing to say, but the fact is that thousands of people come without anything happening to them at all. And at the end of the day...
And predominantly young men as well, Mike. Let's not forget young single men.
People are sick to death, and I think people have sort of lost faith with Rwanda. I was one of those people who thought at the beginning it was a good idea. But because it hasn't been enacted and because Rishi's waited such a long time to get to this point, I think people have kind of lost interest in it. And I said earlier today, you know, it's a bit like watching The Wizard of Oz. You know, suddenly there's a dog tugging at the curtain and there's a guy there just wearing a suit and he's not actually a magician at all. And nothing's really going to change. After tomorrow, which may or may not result in you being happy because he may not change anything, what's actually going to be the difference?
Well, look, your scepticism is completely understood and certainly felt in places like Stoke-on-Trent, North Kids, wherever
Yeah.
talk that I serve, which is why we are simply trying to make this bill as solid as it can be to avoid getting more backlogged in the courts, to actually deliver, because you are correct. If we go for an election in the autumn
Yeah.
or even early winter, this, if it goes through, even unamended, will have gone through the test of time. And if we are in September, October, where still no plane has taken off and individuals haven't gone, what we've seen with that recent MRP poll at the beginning of the week, which predicts a 1997, will only get worse.
It will.
And that's why we're trying to avoid that. And we're trying to make the case to the Prime Minister. And I hope, that he really does use this opportunity to engage with us in good faith. As I said, we've met the red lines he gave us. We've got this drafted. We've got a eminent KC in John Larkin, who was the Attorney General for Northern Ireland for around a decade, who's given his legal opinion that supports our arguments. So, we've done the hard yards here to try and do everything we can. We just need the Prime Minister to say, this is it, this is good enough. And the rest of my party just toe the line, because you've already agreed we're going to ignore Strasbourg.
Yeah.
So why not allow it to be the default?
Yeah.
We're not upset. The One Nations have already agreed to that.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, his position is more and more untenable, really, because are you expecting, though, to have the call early in the morning to go for another salmon breakfast? Are you going to get a call to go, right, come into Downing Street, let's hammer it out, let's get those amendments adopted, let's get them somehow into the bill, even though they were defeated last night? Is that what you're hoping
I'll
for?
Keep the phone on loud, Mike.
Right, well, if it rings now, you can answer it.
If he does call, we'll have a conversation live in there. But the phone is ready, and I'm happy to come in. And I will disappoint. There was no salmon. It was bacon rolls, or some pastries, which were very tasty.
Who invents this stuff then? Why do they say it's a salmon breakfast?
I know. I don't think it would shock you, Mike, that I'm hardly the salmon type of guy.
Salmon paste.
I like my meat red.
Salmon paste. I'm quite partial to that.
Oh, are you? Okay, you're much more cultured than I am.
Yeah, well, yeah, but listen, no, you're absolutely right. But I mean, in the end, I also heard today that he may pull the vote altogether. He doesn't have to, by law, put it to a third reading tomorrow if he doesn't want to. He might say, and knowing Rishi as we do, he might do this. He might say, maybe we'll take another week and kick it into the long grass and do it next week.
So my understanding of the programme motion that we passed in Parliament, which I know is very technical, sorry for viewers and listeners, is that if the bill is unamended, then we would immediately go to a third reading vote, which is obviously then when we pass it on to the House of Lords.
Yeah.
But you are correct. There's nothing to stop the government saying, we'll finish committee stage and then we'll have a week. And in that week, we could sit around the table and really try and find a way forward to make sure we can deliver a policy that does satisfy all wings of the Conservative Party. But more importantly than that, because it shouldn't be about satisfying the Conservative Party, it's about satisfying the country and delivering for the country, to show that when we say something, we can actually do it. And then we will buy credibility by doing that, which means when we make more promises to cut more taxes or to do more stuff to get away from the trappings of the EU that sadly still exist, in terms of legislation or regulations that we have, then the public will believe us. And ultimately, that's where, at the moment, the public are feeling quite disappointed in us.
They
wanted, big change. And they voted for Boris and they voted for the Conservative Party in 2019 because they wanted to see a radical government doing radical things. They voted for radicalism under Thatcher. They voted for radicalism under Attlee. Yeah. And the Conservative Party, I don't think, has sadly lived up to that mantra.
I don't think they have. And also immigration, we're always told by people who are on the left side of politics that it's not something that concerns people. It really is something that concerns people. We know that from the people that we talk to here. We know that it's very high on the agenda of an awful lot of people's considerations because it affects so much of what we do. It affects the NHS, it affects housing, it affects schools, it affects the roads, it affects the transport network. Everything has been touched by the fact that our population has gone through the roof in recent years and continues to invite more than 1 million people every single year to come and work here.
Well, Mike, one figure that we always hear is that we need to build 300,000 homes a year.
Yeah.
Well, actually, due to the mass migration we've had into this country, it's around 600,000 homes that we need per year. Right. But, we've had 7 million more people registered with a GP who are all, by the way, migrants who have come to this country. Yeah. That means more pressure on NHS, more cost to us, the taxpayer. And when there's this idea, this Treasury orthodoxy that somehow mass migration is good for our economy, what they forget is that individual might come in, but what salary are they coming in at? And when we've got a scheme where you can get a 20% discount on British wages, then you're already paying cheaper, so you're not going to be paying in as much tax. You're going to be bringing your family over with
and they're
you.
also bringing dependents.
How many children are going to need school places? How many elderly dependents will need to use our NHS? That is a cost to the British taxpayer. And like you say, if we don't get control of both legal and illegal migration, then the country will go, what is the point of the Conservative Party? And it will look, as it is doing currently, at other options like Reform, who very simply, I don't think really have actually a detailed plan, but they are just an option for people to lodge a protest vote. The Conservative Party has to earn the right of those people's, the country's vote. I totally accept that. But we do that through delivery, not through rhetoric.
Do you think there's a chance that some people, like some of your colleagues who voted for some of the amendments to make this bill stronger, would consider a move to reform? Because obviously there are people who will say, some of those people not a million miles from reform itself, that they're talking to people who might walk across the chamber, who might go to reform as sitting MPs.
Alex Phillips was flirting with me over the line the other day, trying to get me to walk the floor. Look, I'd be deeply upset and disappointed and angry if any Conservative chose to walk the floor, because I do not think that going to reform is the right option. I think that whilst there are many things that we probably agree on, and maybe there's a cigarette paper between us on certain issues, ultimately the Conservative Party is the party that can and has won elections on multiple occasions, can and hopefully will continue to deliver more for our great nation, and is a party I joined at 18 years old and a party I'll remain loyal to.
So you talk as though you're a man that thinks that you can pull this all back from the brink then, that, you know, the Tory party isn't finished, the death knells that are being predicted that the Tory party is not going to survive this year, never mind, you know, this millennia. Are you confident that you can get back to some kind of, you know, properly, shall we say, representative party of people that will actually vote you back in?
Well, if we can get this Rwanda bill to work in the way that myself, Robert Jenrick and Bill Cash are proposing with many other colleagues, then that'll be one way of showing that we're serious and actually leading a world-leading scheme where many other countries around the world will copy, by the way. And then Labour will be exposed for having the no plan that we know that they have. If we do other radical things like make it very clear, the next BBC Charter review, the licence fee is going to go. We're going to bin the telly tax,
Can you get rid
which
of
is
Gary
long
Lineker as well?
overdue as well.
Can you get rid of Gary Lineker?
Mr Lineker has had the invitation to run against me in Stoke North, and I hope he'll finally take up on it.
But he's now being endorsed by the Hamas Quds news network.
Well, perhaps he could commentate on their football as well, maybe.
Well, maybe he could, absolutely.
But if, you know, let's say the licence fee. If we also then go further with house building, we know we need to build houses, but let's be radical about that by looking at all the brownfield sites that we have. And if that means a bit of government funding to help local councils to remunerate the land in order to build these fantastic homes, let's crack on and do it. Let's make sure that levelling up wasn't just a slogan, but something we were very serious about. Right. So I do believe that we can absolutely do that. And again, the Prime Minister, to be fair, actually does have clear plans and clear pledges that he puts out to the public, unlike his opponent, who you and I both know, Mike, flip-flops from one thing to the next, has no clear position, nor no clear backbone about what he actually believes. 10 pledges to be Labour leader, ditched them. Jeremy Corbyn's my friend, ditched him. You know, he's got a copy and paste shadow chancellor who isn't able to clearly write her own book, but expects us and winces her own finances, but thinks that she should be in charge of the country's finances. It is terrifying, the alternative, which is why I remain absolutely behind the Prime Minister. And all we're trying to do with these amendments is make sure he can deliver on this policy that he has staked so much on.
OK, one final question. You have to be quick. If he doesn't change it, though, if he leaves it as it is, and tomorrow you go in to vote, are you going to vote against it?
I will not vote for the bill in its current state, unamended. So therefore, I will sit down with other colleagues and see where they are, but I am prepared to either abstain or vote against.
OK.